Okay, this morning I'm sat with in Bristol with Dr. Paul Fuller and Justin Whittaker, and we're going to be talking about things related to Buddhism. But Paul, people may have noticed Burmese Buddhism suddenly being in the press in the West in a way it's not normally, and we haven't normally heard about it. Why have we suddenly seen all these things about it in the Western press?
Yeah, it's a very interesting phenomenon that's happening here. It's people's impression of Buddhism. Over the last 100 years has been one that Buddhism is this peaceful religion, and they don't discriminate against anyone. And their textual tradition is full of teachings about compassion and loving kindness. But now we have this militant group of Buddhists, particularly in Burma and in Sri Lanka as well, who are kind of very vociferous in joining their Buddhist identity with their national identity. And so we've got movements like joining together nation, race and religion, Amyu Bata Tatana, joining these kind of slogans together to create a Burmese Buddhist identity. And this is quite a striking phenomenon, so this is why it's come into the news recently.
Thank you, and that's kind of, we find the phrase militant Buddhism very jarring in Westerners.
Yeah, so there's various terms being used to describe this phenomenon. The term that I've started to use, just to try to unpick what's going on in modern Buddhism, is this term ethnocentric Buddhism, because Buddhist identity is being linked to ethnic identity, and particularly Burmese ethnic identity or Sri Lankan ethnic identity. And it's something we kind of don't expect to happen in Buddhism.
And we've only previously presumably seen nationalism and Buddhism really get going in parts of Japan, I guess. But in Southeast Asia, it's a kind of relatively new phenomenon, the extent to which this happened, I guess.
Yeah, we imagine it's kind of a new phenomenon. But then I start to kind of question this notion: is this a new phenomenon, or are we misreading, superimposing upon Buddhism a history which culturally and socially was not actually there? Maybe Buddhist identity has always been much stronger and much stronger linked to notions of race and identity than it has been from the textual tradition. So maybe there's always been this phenomenon in existence.
So Buddhism in the West has been this kind of colonial kind of exercise of imagining there being something which hasn't always reflected what it's like in those countries.
Yeah, so maybe we have an imagined Buddhism, a history, a 2,500-year history of imagined Buddhism, this phenomenon that scholars have called since the 1980s Protestant Buddhism. In Protestant Buddhism, the laity is very prominent in the structure of Buddhist society. But in ethnocentric Buddhism, we have the notion that the monastics, again, are reclaiming their place at the top of the hierarchy, and they are beginning to say that Buddhism is in some ways under threat, maybe from an imagined enemy, often an Islamic enemy, or someone other than themselves.
So that story is one that we encounter in other religions, because it's a story about authority. And about where authority for defending or defining tradition sits. So it's kind of quite traditional for religious studies, I guess, to be involved in that. But we often think that Buddhism is outside of that, mistakenly.
It doesn't have a hierarchy. We assume it doesn't have a hierarchy of monastics at the top and lay people lower down in the system somewhere. But if we look at Buddhist culture, the monastics have always been the voice of the Buddhist community, and they've always held authority. So maybe we shouldn't be so surprised if now they're saying that Buddhism is under threat in some ways, and you have to defend Buddhism, because the Dharma is the most essential thing for people to defend, and it's the monastics. It's kind of part of their remit. They have to defend the Dharma, and they have to preserve the Dharma. I'm not trying to justify this anyway, but to try to make sense of what's going on. Because most of these phenomena most people would regard as in some ways distasteful in some ways and un-Buddhist. But is it really that un-Buddhist? That's what I'm getting at by using this term ethnocentric Buddhism.
Thank you.